Hey, this is Kristin with Airport Improvement Magazine, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Stephen Van Beek with the Steer Group. How are you, Steve?
I'm fine, Kristin. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too, even virtually. We'll take it.
Yes.
Steve and I met years ago, probably when I was first starting in aviation, and you had been in the aviation field for a while already, and you're somebody I've always looked to and looked up to for having really wise thoughts on the aviation field and what's going on, and you have a great perspective. So we wanted to share with our Airport Improvement Magazine viewers some of your perspectives on the current situation and what you think is going to happen next.
Sure. Well, that's quite a demanding bill, but let's get to it.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, what are you seeing right now? You know, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing the airports are doing and what's going to come, in your opinion?
Yeah, so Kristin, it's a very unusual situation, even compared to the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks or the Great Financial Recession. We've seen a fall off of demand of 85 to 90% in almost every market, and it stayed down there for a little while. And frankly, airport finances, their business models, the Airport and Airway Trust Fund in Washington, none were built with the idea that there would be this large a drop and such a long sustained drop in traffic and therefore revenues that come in to support the system. If we add on it then the uncertainty of when we're likely to recover, that makes it very complex indeed for people like me to do commercial forecasts and to try to help our clients with.
Right, I can imagine, because there's so many variables.
Yeah, the biggest variable we have right now is once we get out of the post-lockdown period, we're going to enter that period of post-lockdown, pre-vaccine. And that period is going to require a lot of mitigations, for example, social distancing, that our crowded airports really haven't been built for. And so even as if we start to recover economically, the additional challenges our airports have is how do we instill confidence in our customers? Because people aren't going to start flying just because we say the stay-at-home orders are lifted. They're going to worry about their families and their friends, and businesses are going to worry about their employees. So how do we as an industry, airlines, airports, concessionaires, all the people who touch the customer, how can we get together and figure out a process that instills public confidence?
As you've been talking to your clients, do you feel like there is a general sense of hope and positivity, or do you feel like everybody's still a little shell-shocked?
Actually, I don't think clients I talk to have been too emotional about it, Chris. And I think where they are is they've been doing budgets for next year. And their challenge is getting a forecast that says how much revenue is going to come in so they know how to handle the money. Now, you know, many of them got some decent money from the CARES Act in relief to help support airport operations. But, you know, airports are very capital intensive organizations that require a lot of personnel just to stay open. And so it's very hard to sort of align airport expenses with the revenues that are coming in. Now, some have built up, fortunately, 6 months and more of operating reserves to try to get through this period. But we don't know how long the period's going to last, and therefore that becomes the challenge from a business point of view. And the CARES Act also, you likely know, said that you have to retain 90% of your employees if you take this government assistance. So that's been a real challenge, and that's different than airports, for example, in the United Kingdom, where my company is, where they've laid a lot of people off, and the aid went not to the airports, but to the people who were unemployed or as part of furlough packages.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's probably welcome for the employees out there.
Yes, yes, yes. But you know, the real challenge we have is how do we create now a sustainable business model going forward for airports with this uncertainty? Because even if we recover, let's say in the next 3, 4, 5 years, as I think we likely will, depending on the health equation on this, we're going to have a lot of airport capacity chasing, in a way, too few passengers. So we've really built up airports for the peak that we have been enjoying. And now we're going to have to go through some what will be painful restructuring on the part of many airports. And you're going to see that with airlines as well. And so we're in a period now of both uncertainty, but also people having to take leadership and work with the industry to restructure their operations and businesses.
Have you seen any ways that 9/11 prepared the aviation industry for this? Is there anything that they could look back and say, well, we did this after 9/11, we could use this again? Is there any kind of anything like that?
I think it's really almost more the optimism, Kristin, as you started with. I think 9/11 was such a cataclysmic emotional event. And though it wasn't as economically painful as I think this event has been, it was more, I think, it hit our hearts harder, and it hit our view as a country and the challenge harder. And I do think that has made us more resilient. And just to put it in commercial terms, there are many contracts, for instance, that have provisions that, for example, for concessionaires that say if traffic drops more than 25%, the minimum annual guarantees that you had to pay could be lifted. So we had a little bit of learning from it, but I think what we really built up was a degree of resiliency, and that we can get to the other side. The hardest part here is it's not just about changing and creating TSA and new security processes. It's not knowing how long it's going to take and not knowing the degree of mitigations to keep people safe that we have to employ at airports and on airliners.
Right, that makes sense. Can you talk about any kind of examples of airports or your clients that are doing interesting, innovative things to get ready and try to figure out what to do next?
Well, what I find interesting is as the volume of aircraft landing at facilities has dropped, some airports, like even a small one like Lehigh Valley, they've gone through and they've decided to expedite their runway project because they can use their secondary runway for the operations that they have. And so they're making, in a sense, lemonade out of lemons here. And so when the recovery occurs, then that project will already be done. Similar with some of the terminal projects where you have heavy volumes of people, airports are able now to finish some of those terminal projects and push the people over into other gates and concourses in order to complete those projects. So I think that's one big part of it. The other part is what people really want is some notion of a conservative forecast going forward that allows them to do business planning. And I think that's the part where that's the greatest demand that we're in for right now. And even on some, we're working on one project, a $7 billion terminal project for the Carlisle Airport Group. And they start their project in January, hopefully 2024. But the challenge there is what's going to happen between now and 2024.
There's a lot to think about. Well,
And these airports want to keep people employed because if you can do these infrastructure projects, then we can try to push down some of those levels of unemployment.
And that would be helpful. Yeah, everybody's looking forward to that, I'm sure. And it makes
Yes.
For the terminal projects that are already funded, it makes a lot of sense to try to get those done while the loads are lower.
Yeah, and elsewhere what you're seeing is where you have too much capacity on the terminals, like at Boston Logan, for example, they're shutting down gates and roping those off so they don't have to clean them, and then they can funnel the aircraft that are coming in to the gates that are open. And that reduces operating costs, and it reduces sort of the burden of carrying all that capacity at once. And I think over this next 3-year period, we're going to see a lot of adjustments by airports in order to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Well, as always, I love hearing your perspective, Stephen. Very interesting and informative. So I thank you for taking a little time with us today.
Good to be with you. Thank you.